What is a related party? Is that defined in the Companies Act? What's a related party? Okay, what do you consider to be a related party? So we'll have a definition of a related party, which is here. What do you consider to be, whom do you consider to be a related party rather? Who is a related party? So we had a look at the categories of transactions. So the first thing when you look at or analyze whether a transaction falls within the category of related party transactions or not is to check whether the category of the transaction falls within any of those types which are specified in 188. And the second thing is to check if it's entered into with a related party. And what's a related party? Let's have a look at that definition. So we'll come to know and analyze what falls within the definition of a related party. So here, 276, related party with reference to a company means a director or his relative. So if a company is entering into that category of transactions with a director or his relative, then it's a related party transactions. Or if it's a key managerial personnel or his relative. Now, key managerial personnel is again defined clearly in the Companies Act. It would include the managing director, CFO, the company secretary, whole-time directors. All of those people will be included within the category of key managerial personnel. So, key managerial personnel or his relative. A firm in which a director, manager or relative is a partner. A private company in which a director or manager or his relative is a member or director. Okay. A public company in which a director and manager is a director and holds along with his relatives more than 2% of its paid up share capital. Any body corporate whose board of directors, managing director or manager is accustomed to act in accordance with the advice, directions or instructions of a director or manager, and any person on whose advice, directions or instruction a director or manager is accustomed to act. Now this, the last one becomes a very much a statement of fact. So you would have to have proper evidence to say that someone is a person on whose advice, directions or instructions a director or manager is accustomed to act. Except that in this case also, if someone is giving that kind of advice only in a professional capacity, like a consultant, okay, then they are not covered within the definition of this person whose advice, directions or instructions director or manager is accustomed to act. Okay, and any body corporate which is holding subsidiary or associate company, subsidiary of a holding company to which it is also a subsidiary, or investing company or venturer of the company. Now we talk about that instance of one company making a lending, okay, to another company within the group. Let's see if it falls within the category of related party transactions. Okay, so first of all, we can have a look at 188. Let's open another tab so we can have a look at both the sections together. Lending or a loan, does it fall within the category of related party transactions if it is made from one group company to another? Let us say they are not holding in subsidiaries, but from one group company to another. Okay, that's what we are. That's what you can commonly see, because if a company has funds and another one doesn't, then they'll be making a lending. Now, is lending covered here? Sale, purchase or supply of goods or materials, selling or disposing of or buying property of any kind, leasing of property of any kind, availing or rendering of services, appointment of agent, related party appointment to office or place of profit, underwriting, subscription of securities. Loans does not feature anywhere within this. Okay, loans does not feature in this. So that's one thing you have to understand, that loans are not covered in this category. Loans would go into an entirely different section which deals with loans and investments between two group companies. So intercorporate loans and investments. It will not go in this category if one sister company is lending to another sister company. It will not go in the related party transactions category. Okay, only if it falls within the purview of these types, then it will be covered within the definition of related party transactions. Okay, So let's come back to the definition of relative. What is a relative? Again, a relative is also defined very clearly. So have a look at that. So relative with reference to any person means someone who's related to another if they are members of a Hindu undivided family. Okay. If their husband or wife or one person is related to another in such manner as may be prescribed. So if there is another section here which talks about the relation. So let's have a look at, there are some 8 relationships provided here under the Companies Act which you need to consider. Okay. Now bear in mind, if it is a listed company, you have to look at the provisions of the listing obligations and disclosure requirements to know exactly who is a related person, because there is a bit of a broader definition in the listing obligation and disclosure requirements than what is stated in the Companies Act. It states that those that are there in the Companies Act are as per the accounting standards. So again, there is an accounting standard IND AS 24 which is applicable to listed companies. So we are talking only about listed companies here. For non-listed entities, this definition under the Companies Act is enough. So once you determine that that relationship, that specific relationship does not fall within this category of a related party that is covered under the Companies Act, or the transaction does not fall within that list of transactions, it will not be considered to be a related party transaction for unlisted companies. For listed companies, again, you have to have a look at the listing obligation and disclosure requirement regulations, which will talk about which talks about 2 things. One, related as provided under the provisions of the Companies Act, and another related as provided under the IND AS 24, which talks of related party transactions. So these are the things that you would have to refer to in the case of a listed company. Okay. So, but when you are analyzing a related party transactions, the 2 things that you need to check is whether it is covered under 188, 1, and whether it is covered in the definition of a related party in terms of section 276 and 277, which defines relatives. Okay, these are the 2 things which you must analyze and check if the transaction falls into, to determine if it is a related party transaction. For a listed company, you would have to go a little bit beyond and check LODR and IND AS 24. Okay. So yeah, what we discussed was we need to be checking those 2 things first, whether when we want to analyze as to whether it falls within the definition of a related party transaction or not. Okay. So I'll close this relatives definition here. Okay. Let's go a little bit forward in the session and we will have our questions answered. Again, now when another thing that you need to keep in mind is this section is applicable to both public and private companies. Okay. Earlier there used to be some sort of exemption that was available to private companies, and so private companies had a bit of a flexibility of entering into related party transactions. But now that is not the case. The requirement of related party transactions applies to the private company also. The only exemption that the private company gets is that where the members are required to pass a special resolution. In case the members are required to pass a special resolution, then those members are not required to be non-related parties or independent parties. That's the only exemption that is given to a private company. Otherwise, the requirements of 188 applies as much to a private company as it does to a public company. Okay. Yes, I have a question on this. Listed company related options is that you need to check the listing obligation and disclosure requirement regulations, LODR, SEBI LODR, and the IND AS 24, which is the accounting standard on related party transactions, to determine whether or not it is a related party. Okay. So those are the listed company requirements. Does that answer your question? So going forward, so we need to note that, it is the private company is not exempted. Okay, even for private companies, it will still apply irrespective of, if there are related party transactions by private companies, this section is still applicable.